almost a decade, everybody asked the same question. Should the Boston Celtics break up Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown? Every playoff failure brought the question back. Every bad shooting night made it louder. Every trade rumor seemed to have Brown's name attached to it. And every time Boston came up short, people wondered whether these two stars actually belonged together. Then something happened that was supposed to kill that conversation forever. They won the championship. Tatum and Brown reached the top of the NBA together. They proved the doubters wrong. They were supposed to enter Celtics history together. And somehow, 2 years later, Jaylen Brown is wearing a Philadelphia 76ers jersey. And here's where the story gets uncomfortable. After nearly a decade together, after multiple conference finals, 2 NBA Finals appearances, and a championship, Brown was asked whether he and Tatum had talked since the trade. The answer? Not really. Think about that. 9 years, hundreds of games, a championship, and when it was finally over, there wasn't some emotional goodbye between two brothers. There was distance. And so what happened? Was their relationship secretly broken all along? Did years of being compared against each other finally take their toll? Did Boston's constant willingness to discuss Brown in trades create resentment? And did winning a championship actually hide problems that were already underneath the surface? Because the story of Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown isn't simply about two stars who stopped playing together. It's about two young players who grew into superstars, won everything together, and still never became what everyone assumed they would. And so this is a complicated rise and fall of the Jays. To understand why their relationship became so fascinating, you have to understand how unusual their partnership was from the very beginning. Boston drafted Jaylen Brown 3rd overall in 2016. 1 year later, they drafted Jayson Tatum 3rd overall. Two young wings, similar positions, similar timelines. Both needed the basketball. Both wanted to become stars. And almost immediately, Boston started winning. That's important, because most young stars get several years to figure themselves out. Tatum and Brown did not. They were thrown directly into expectations. In Tatum's rookie season, Boston reached Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Suddenly, the Celtics weren't developing two prospects. They were developing two potential superstars on a team expected to compete for championships. And as they improved, a natural question emerged. Which one was actually Boston's future? This is where the dynamic started becoming complicated, because although Brown arrived first, Tatum quickly became the player viewed around the league as Boston's centerpiece. Tatum became an all-star, then an all-NBA player, then an MVP candidate. His jersey was everywhere. National television promoted him. He became the face most closely associated with the Celtics. And Brown became something different. Not a role player, not even a traditional second option. Brown became a superstar playing next to another superstar who was generally viewed as being slightly above him. That's a difficult position, because whenever Boston succeeded, people talked about Tatum becoming the next great Celtic. But whenever Boston struggled, suddenly people started asking whether Brown should be traded. And those conversations became impossible to ignore. By the early 2020s, the criticism exploded. Boston would lose an important game, and analysts would ask, can Tatum and Brown coexist? Do they play too similarly? Does Boston need a traditional point guard? Should one of them be traded? And notice something about those conversations. Usually, the player being discussed in hypothetical trades was not Tatum. It was Brown. Tatum was increasingly treated as untouchable. Brown was treated as the asset Boston could use to find Tatum another superstar, and that distinctions matter. Because imagine being an all-star. Imagine helping your team reach the conference finals. Imagine improving almost every season, and then turning on the television every summer and hearing people debate which superstar should replace you. Eventually, Kevin Durant became connected to Boston's trade speculation. Once again, Brown's name became central to the conversation. And years later, Tatum admitted something important. He said he wished he had been more publicly vocal in supporting Brown when those rumors surrounded him. Tatum wasn't saying he wanted Brown traded, quite the opposite. But his personality was generally to stay away from the front office business. The problem, silence can feel different depending on which side you're standing on. To Tatum, staying quiet may have simply meant, this isn't my decision. But if you're Brown, and you're constantly hearing that you're the expendable one, public support from your superstar teammate might mean something. And that became one of the subtle themes surrounding their relationship. Not open warfare, not screaming matches, something much quieter, just distance. Sports fans have a strange expectation. When two players spend years together, we assume they must become best friends. Jordan and Pippen, Steph and Clay, Shaq and Kobe. Even when relationships are complicated, fans want to understand them personally. Tatum and Brown never really gave people that. They weren't constantly hanging out publicly. They weren't presenting themselves as inseparable brothers. Their personalities were different. Their interests were different. And because there wasn't an obvious public friendship, every interaction became evidence for somebody's theory. If they didn't celebrate enough, they don't like each other. If one player looked frustrated, there's tension. If Brown had a great game while Tatum struggled, Brown wants to be the number one option. Some of that was almost certainly exaggerated, but perception matters. Because year after year after year, the outside world wasn't merely comparing Boston against other teams. It was comparing Tatum against Brown. Who was better? Who was more clutch? Who deserved more shots? Who was Batman and who was Robin? And eventually, the biggest stage in basketball made those questions even louder. The Celtics reached the finals in 2022 against the Golden State Warriors. For a moment, Boston appeared ready to win the championship. They led the series 2-1. Then everything collapsed. Golden State won 3 straight. Tatum struggled badly by his standards. Brown had strong moments, and Boston went home without the trophy. Instead of bringing the two stars together publicly, the loss intensified the debate. Was Tatum truly capable of being the number one player on a championship team? Was Brown actually Boston's better finals performer? Did the Celtics need to change the roster? The pressure was becoming enormous, and yet they kept winning. That's the strange part about this entire story. For a supposedly incompatible duo, Tatum and Brown were extraordinarily successful. Conference finals, NBA finals, 50+ win seasons, deep playoff runs. They weren't failing, they simply hadn't finished the job. Then came 2024. Boston entered the 2024 postseason with arguably the best roster in basketball. And this time, there was no collapse. The Celtics rolled through the Eastern Conference. They reached the finals against Dallas, and Brown was magnificent. He won the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, and then he won the NBA Finals MVP. And Boston won championship number 18. For years, everyone had debated whether Tatum and Brown could win together. Now the answer was sitting right in front of them. Yes, they could. And something else happened. The hierarchy became more complicated. Tatum was still widely considered Boston's best overall player. But Brown had just collected the 2 biggest individual awards of Boston's championship run. Instead of destroying their partnership, however, Tatum publicly celebrated Brown. And for a moment, it appeared the entire debate had finally died. They had survived everything. The comparisons, the trade rumors, the playoff heartbreak, the criticism, and now they were champions. This should have been the beginning of the second half of their story. Instead, it was almost the ending. The next major point wasn't a trade, it was an injury. Tatum suffered a devastating Achilles injury during the 2025 postseason. Suddenly, Boston's future became uncertain, and Brown was forced into a different position. For years, people had asked what Jaylen Brown would look like without Tatum, and now Boston was about to find out. Brown became the central figure. The responsibility increased. The expectation increased. And during Tatum's recovery, something subtle changed. The Celtics weren't simply waiting for the number one player anymore. They were learning how to operate around Brown. Meanwhile, Tatum faced one of the strangest situations of his career. He was watching his team continue without him. By early 2026, Tatum publicly acknowledged thinking about how he would fit back into the team. And Brown's message to him was essentially, do what's best for you. On the surface, that's supportive, and it probably was. But look at how different the situation had become. These were not 2 20-year-olds growing together anymore. They were established superstars. Brown had become a Finals MVP. Tatum was recovering from the most serious injury of his career. Boston's roster was changing, and questions about the future were returning. Then the trade rumors came back. For years, Jaylen Brown had lived with his name appearing in hypothetical trades. Now it happened again. Boston explored major roster changes. Brown's name surfaced, and once again, the message, intentional or not, was familiar. Tatum is the foundation, Brown might be movable. For a player who had already helped deliver Boston a championship and won Finals MVP while doing it, that had to hit differently. Because what exactly did Brown still have left to prove? He had developed into an all-NBA level player. He had stayed through the criticism. He had survived trade rumors. He helped bring Boston its first championship since 2008, and yet his future was once again uncertain. Then Boston finally did what people had spent years suggested. They broke up the Jays. Summer 2026, Jaylen Brown was traded to Philadelphia 76ers. 9 seasons alongside Tatum. Over. Just like that. And Brown's reaction told you how unexpected it felt. He later described being stunned when he learned that he had been traded. Think about the symbolism. Boston didn't send Brown somewhere irrelevant. They sent him to Philadelphia, a division rival, a franchise the Celtics had battled repeatedly. Now Brown would potentially have opportunities to stand across from Tatum instead of beside him. Tatum later said he learned about the trade essentially when everyone else did. He called the situation weird. He talked about how difficult it was to lose someone he had gone through 9 seasons with. And publicly, Tatum showed Brown love. He thanked him for pushing him. He celebrated what they accomplished. He wished him success. But then Brown spoke. And suddenly, people started looking at the relationship a little bit differently. At Brown's introductory press conference in Philly, he was asked about his relationship with Tatum. Brown acknowledged the obvious. They won a championship together. There were ups and downs. There was respect. But then came the question that immediately grabbed people's attention. Had they talked since the trade? Brown's answer was essentially, not really. And that doesn't prove hatred. It doesn't prove some secret feud. But after 9 years, it's difficult not to notice. Because Brown also reflected on the idea that after spending so much time together, there might have been a deeper brotherhood. And that appears to be the real story. Maybe Tatum and Brown didn't have some dramatic falling out. Maybe there wasn't one argument that destroyed everything. Maybe the relationship simply never became as close as people assumed it would. They were teammates, they respected each other, they pushed each other, they accomplished something historic together. But friendship and partnership aren't necessarily the same thing. And when the partnership disappeared, there may not have been enough left to keep them connected. And there's another side to this, because Tatum has made something clear. He believes outside forces repeatedly tried to put them against each other. And he's right about one thing. For years, almost everything surrounding Boston became a competition between the Jays. Brown scores 35, he's better than Tatum. Tatum struggles, Brown should be the number 1 option. Brown struggles, trade him. Tatum succeeds, get him a better co-star. That kind of conversation might generate television ratings. But imagine living inside it for nearly a decade. Imagine every accomplishment being used to diminish your teammate. Every failure being used as evidence that one of you needs to leave. Eventually, even if 2 players don't dislike each other, that environment can create pressure. And that's why blaming everything on Brown or Tatum misses the bigger picture. Boston's front office made decisions. The media created narratives. Fans participated in comparisons. The players had their own personalities. And 9 years of expectations accumulated. The relationship didn't need one explosion. It could deteriorate one small piece at a time. And maybe that's the most fascinating part of the story. Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown might be remembered as one of the strangest great partnerships in NBA history. Because they accomplished almost everything. They became all-stars. They became all-NBA players. They got to multiple finals. They won a championship. Brown became Finals MVP. Tatum became one of the faces of the league. Together, they became one of the most successful duos of their generation. But personally, their relationship was always harder to define. Not enemies, not necessarily brothers, something in between. 2 ambitious players who entered the NBA 1 year apart, grew up inside the same championship pressure cooker, were compared against each other for a full decade, and somehow survived long enough to reach the mountaintop together. Maybe that's why the ending feels so strange, because normally when a partnership fails, we can point to the reason. Shaq and Kobe had an obvious feud. Other star parents suffered obvious basketball problems. Tatum and Brown, they actually succeeded. That's what makes this different. They answered the biggest question anyone could ask. Can these two win together? Yes, they proved it. And they still ended up apart. Now Brown is in Philadelphia, Tatum remains in Boston. And for the first time in nearly a decade, their careers are no longer attached to each other. But maybe the final chapter hasn't actually been written, because eventually, Boston will play Philly. Brown will walk into the arena where he once helped raise a championship banner. Tatum will be on the opposite side. And every comparison, every trade rumor, every argument about who was better will come rushing back. Except this time, there won't be any debate about whether they should be separated, because they already are. For 9 years, basketball kept asking whether Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown could survive each other. Maybe we were asking the wrong question, because they survived the pressure, they survived the losses, they survived the trade rumors, they even survived long enough to become champion. What they couldn't survive was forever.